In this video, I want to talk to you about how you can run commands inside containers. You can use the docker run command, of course, on your host and pass an argument after the name of the image, which will be the command that you want to run inside the container. And that is one solution, but you can also use the Dockerfile and build an image. In the Dockerfile, you can use the CMD instruction or the ENTRYPOINT instruction, and you can also use the shell instruction. And all of these instructions will build the final command which will run inside the container. And I will also mention the run instruction, which is useful when you want to build an image and not when you want to run a container. But before I can start explaining my examples, I want to show you that I have a blog post about this topic, and you can read everything there. And you can also find some important facts that you need to know if you want to understand what I'm talking about. If you scroll down, then you can find the examples, and you can see that I have a very short Docker file. And if I go back to my source code, then my Docker file is different. And this is different because I wanted to add some scripts which will help me to rebuild my environment. I can build my images and then I can reset everything and remove my generated images. And to do that, I needed some labels which I can refer to in my script. So the important part in this Docker file is everything about that metadata comment. Now let's talk about those. And the first example, we use the CMD instruction in the exec form, which means that we just execute the command inside the container without having any shell. And without shell, we don't have the way to use environment variables. So this, my home is home, will just show me the name of the variable and not the value of the variable. Second example, which will use the CMD instruction, and it will use the shell form. And the shell form means that we will have a shell, but the problem is that I quote the entire argument of the CMD instruction, which will be the same as if I just run a command in the terminal using the quotation mark around that command, which will mean that I basically want to define a file name. And the third example will show that how you can define the shell form correctly. Now, we don't quote everything, we just write our command as we could run it in the terminal. Now let's go back to my terminal, and I want to show you some scripts which I made, and the first is the list sh. It will show me the list of containers that I've ran before, and I don't have any because I deleted everything. So the second will be the build script, which will help me to build the image, and I need to pass the version number to this build shell script. So I will build the first example, the Dockerfile v1. Let's do it. It will also show you what command you can run if you want to run this build manually, and then you can use the run shell script, which will need the version number again because I want to run the container from the first image, the v1 image. And if I run it, it will also show you the command that you can use if you want to run this docker run command manually. And the green part is the command that you can run. And the second line here, the white line, is the output of that container. Exactly as I predicted, we don't have the value of this home variable. Now I can pass an argument here using the exec form. This is also important when you use the docker run command and pass an argument after the name of the image. It will always be the exec form. You will understand it soon. So, because my CMD instruction is, in the first example, is this my home is home, I want to use it here, echo my home is home. And Now you can see that I'm quoting my command that I want to run inside the container. This is necessary only because I made my script to take the first argument as the version number and the second argument as the arguments of the Docker run command. So if I run it, now you can see the actual executed command here. So it will not have the quotation mark. But this is the home path on my host machine. Let's go back to the second example. And this is the incorrect way to define CMD instruction in the shell form. Let's see how it works. We will build it and run it. And now we get an error message. And the reason is that this command was executed as a single file name, which is not a file name, so it will not work. You can also notice that we have an actual value of that home variable, and in this case it was executed inside a container. It didn't work, but at least our variable can be seen in the error message. So let's change it and override the default CMD instruction. This way, I will again try this. My home is home, and of course it will work because now I'm using the exec form and I can simply run the echo command. So let's try the next example. In this case, we are using the correct form of the instruction of the CMD instruction using the shell form. So we will have a shell and we will not have an error message. First, we need to build it and run it. And we can also override it. Of course, the result is very similar, but now because I used the exec form and my variable was evaluated on my host machine, the path of the home is different. Let's go back to my next example. And now I will close the previous examples and I will also clear my screen. So let's check the fourth example. And now we will use a shell script. Let's see the shell script, the content of the shell script. We can pass arguments to this shell script to override the name, which is by default Docker. Now, you need to notice that I don't have a shebang line at the beginning of this file, which would be the definition of the shell in which this script should be executed. And without that line, it will not have a shell. Now let's go back to Dockerfile. We are using the CMD instruction in the shell form, so it will mean that we will pass the hello sh to the default shell. Now, let's try this. Build v4, we have an image, and we will run this. So the output is hello Docker. This is what we expected. Before we check the next example, we have to override the default CMD instruction. So I will pass hello sh as an argument to the Docker run command, and let's see what happens here. We will get exec format error because in this case, as I mentioned it before, we use the exec form. When we are using the Docker run command and passing the command as an argument to that Docker run command, it will always use the exec form. And because we don't have a shell, hello sh cannot run because we don't have a shebang line in the shell script. We have to try to list our previously ran containers. So let's do that. You can see the columns here, and the first column will show you the name of the container, and the second column will show you the command which was running inside the container, and the third column will show you the output. And when the container was running successfully, you will see the output in green, and when we had an error message, you will see the output in red. And now you can compare the commands which we ran before. When we used the shell form, then we had a shell at the beginning of the command, and when we used the exec form, we didn't have a shell, and this is the difference. In the next example, we'll use a custom shell, and you need to know that you can use anything as a shell. It doesn't have to be an actual valid shell, so in this case, we will use the ls command as a shell. And now you know and you remember that you can use the CMD instruction in the shell form, which means it will be the argument of the shell, which is in this case the ls command. And now we can run it. First I need to build this and run the first version of v5. So you can see the command, docker run command, and the output, which is just the output of the ls command. And it works. And now if I want to override this CMD instruction from the terminal using the docker run command, let's see what happens. I need hello sh, and we will get the exec format error because again we are using the shell script without any shell, so it doesn't know how to execute this. Let's try the next example. Now we will redefine the shell again, but in this case it will be a valid shell. It will be the bash shell. But we also use the entry point, and the entry point is in the shell form, and the CMD instruction is also in the shell form. And usually when we are using the CMD instruction in the exec form, it is the argument of the entry point. And in this case, this is a special case because we have the entry point in the shell form, and everything is in the shell form except the shell itself. So let's just see what happens now. And later I will explain it. Okay, the version is missing. Now, the first will show us hello Docker. If I can pass an argument to the hello sh script, it should show me hello and that argument, and that didn't happen. Let's see the list of our containers. And this is the result, the final result of our previous Dockerfile. So we had an entry point, hello sh. Because we used it in the shell form, it became the argument of a shell. And we are using also the CMD instruction in the shell form, which became the argument of a shell. And because everything is in the shell form, we have a long command here, and the CMD instruction, the modified CMD instruction, became the argument of the modified entry point. And we don't see that in the end result, in the output, because the bash shell will ignore everything after -c hello sh. So this is the reason why we are seeing hello Docker and not hello my friend. And now if I try to override the default CMD instruction, which was my friend, it means I'm using the exec form now because everything that I pass to the docker run command will be in the exec form. Of course, I should use the run script and not the list script. So again, we need v6 and the argument is my friend. Now, so the output is the same. Let's see the list of the containers. So the actual running command inside the container was different, but it doesn't matter because the my friend will be ignored the same way as the previous shell and my friend was ignored. everything after -c hello sh will be ignored. Again, let's go to the next example. This is the example where we are using the exec form, and we are still using hello sh, which doesn't have a shebang line. So let's just try this one. Build v7 and run v7, and we have the exec format error. And if I override the default command, which was my friend, it will be the same because we are still using the same exec form. We just defined it after the name of the image. Let's list the containers. So the same command was running and we get the same output, the same error message. Next. So to fix our previous error, we will use a different shell script in which we will actually define the shebang line, this bash interpreter. And we will change the content of the shell script because we now want to take an argument, and that argument can be an executable, and we will just execute that argument. Back to the Dockerfile, and the CMD instruction will be the whoami command, which will show us the user which is running the command inside the container. Now let's try it, build it, and run it. It works, and now I can override the default CMD instruction, which is again the whoami command, and it will give me the same output because I'm still using the same exec form. Let's list the containers. We don't have any difference between the previous examples. And this example will use the CMD instruction and the entry point in the exec form, but before that, it will use the run instruction in the shell form. If I'm using the run instruction in the shell form, and if I change the shell, this hello bash will be the argument of the shell. If I change the shell to chmod command, then it will just run the chmod command with the argument hello bash, so I will make this file executable. Now let's try this. We can run it with defining the version number, of course, and we can also override the default command. Again, I'm using the whoami command. It works, list the containers again, and there is no difference here. In this example, we will use the exec form for the run instruction, which means that it will not be the argument of the shell, and the shell was the chmod command which was responsible for making this file executable. It will not happen, so let's try this. Build v10, and it will fail. So we don't have to run the containers because we don't have the image. Let's go and fix it in the next example. So we can actually move this chmod part into the same run instruction, so we can still use the exec form. This is something that we usually don't do. We usually use the shell form for the run instruction, and we usually use the exec form for the entry point and the CMD instruction. So now let's run it. First we build it and run it. Of course it works, and now I want to override default CMD instruction whoami, so I will use the same whoami, and it works. Now finally we'll list the containers again. I hope these examples helped you to understand the difference between the exec form and the shell form, and also understand the relation between the shell and the CMD and the entry point instructions. I also have a GitHub repository which I will share under the video, and you don't have to use my scripts if you don't trust them. You can also use the commands which you could see on the screen, or you can read my blog post where I shared the actual commands which you can run manually instead of using my scripts.